You mentioned something else, and this was that human rights, if you believe in human rights, you believe in, and you can believe in animal rights or should believe in animal rights, as I understand it. Um, why do I have to believe in rights at all?
Well, you don't. But again, most people do. I think to some extent you do as well. So we can explore that.
Yeah. Okay. So, all right. So, yeah, that's that's all. That was all. Those were all my questions for now. But I'm gonna be bringing up the dog and cat later, though, out of curiosity, because I'm very surprised. To say the least. Did you have any questions for me, or should I just?
Yeah, I'm interested in the idea of you possibly not believing in the idea of human rights.
Okay.
Yeah, so can you explain what you mean by that?
Human rights are granted by physical governments. They're
Sure.
not that ultimately it's what we know as a social contract is literally a contract, which means that if the contract is broken, said rights, promises, etc., don't exist. I personally do not. This is just personal. I personally do not believe we have a functioning democratic republic anymore. Uh, I I think we live in a coup, and frankly, that's it's supposedly free speech, but nobody really cares whether or not I say it. The simple reality is people live in coups and harsh regimes all over the world. Why should I be surprised if this is any different except that we have iPhones? I mean, really, the question is who grants you rights? Now, the concept behind the Constitution, of course, is that rights are granted to men by God. That is an interesting concept. It's very deistic, but I don't see how it has any real application if your military strongman of choice decides that you're not going to have freedom of assembly anymore or freedom of speech. These rights have been suspended, have been thrown away many times. Why should I? If I don't believe that human rights are real, why would I believe that animal rights are real?
Yeah, okay. So it is a problem that we have governments who maybe form an oligarchy, we're non democratic, things like that. And yeah, rights have to be granted. You're right. Now, usually when I bring up the topic of rights, I'm talking from somebody's personal perspective of what rights they believe should be granted. So even if let's say we live in an oligarchy and technically we didn't have any rights, it and your right to free speech could be taken away if you say the wrong thing, or you could be locked up, or
That's happening now.
yeah, to some extent. And but again, I'm debating you, right? I'm not debating the American Republic or anything. So from your perspective, you would believe in like a principle of universal human rights where everybody should have protection under the law from, getting hurt, killed, property stolen from. I think you believe in free speech principles, things like that.
Um, Insofar as I can formally accept them, yes, but that would simply make them a moral. That would simply make them a moral standpoint from my perspective. They would be unenforceable, and so ultimately, my perspective on that would be irrelevant. If again, I'm not a governing body, at least not today. If I was, of course, those things would be important to me to some degree. Free speech to a slightly more limited degree. But the point is, I'm not in charge. Insofar as I am, then the rules apply as I see fit. So ultimately, that is. It sounds like there should be a universal here, but I don't see it. Um, a good example is we take freedom of religion very seriously in America. For example, I do not believe in freedom of religion. I think everyone should become Orthodox. I believe that heretics should be quieted down. I believe that degenerates should get jail time. So I don't believe in a lot of the things that um, that you would call I guess you could say that are part of that package of American rights, which I grew up with, sounded great, loved it, but experiments have an end.
Yeah, that's totally fine. So, the one point you made that, so because this is only from your perspective. This is just your moral view. It's not necessarily rights.
Right.
Like the idea behind having rights comes from this idea of what would be, morally good. So they're a little interchangeable. Yeah, like the distinction between morals and rights are that rights are enforced. But and on top of that, like, I mean, you aren't technically a governing body, but you are a governing body of yourself. I'm sure you would live life and apply your rules of ethics and your morals the way you see fit. So we might differ in terms of what morals or what rights we would be interested in granting to human beings.
Hmm.
I'm a free speech advocate, and I believe in freedom of religion. To some extent, you're against free speech when it comes to heresy.
Well,
Um,
I'm pornography. Pornography, I'm really big on.
sure, sure. But I do think we agree on a lot of other things. I think we believe that people shouldn't be murdered, or think we shouldn't steal. I think we agree that children shouldn't be exploited. So, like, I am against child prawn. I don't know if I allowed to say certain terms on here. But yeah, so from that perspective, I would say in order to be logically consistent, you would have to grant those same rights or moral principles to animals. And I would ask you, from your perspective, could you name a trait that's lacking in animals that, if lacking in human beings, would sorry, justify that difference in treatment? Or sorry, let me say that again. Name a trait that's lacking in animals that, if lacking in human beings, would justify, say, you treating those human beings the way you would treat animals right now, where, like, I'm assuming sometimes you eat meat.
Yes.
Yeah. So, like, I'm just interested in what trait or set of traits a human being could lack where you would be okay with, say, having a human being at a burger or steak or something.
None. I believe that a human being, unlike animals, is a unique creation of God. So it
Okay.
would be impossible for me to say that animals and humans are the same. I understand where your worldview may be coming from, and that's probably based on the whole evolutionary mindset that we're all animals and stuff. I don't believe that, and that's not the church's teaching. The church's teaching is that human beings are a unique creation by God.
Okay, so being a unique creation from God would be the trait, essentially. And you think there aren't any human beings that lack that trait,
Correct.
but animals do lack that trait.
Correct.
Okay.
That doesn't. I don't want to. I don't want to. Remember that the human being in Orthodox anthropology is designed to be responsible for creation. And so, animals are part of creation. So it's not like we have a blank check to like factory farm and create like massive destruction. No, our job is to take care of the earth. And that's a responsibility that to some degree, I think a number of vegans kind of instinctually understand that, but don't realize how much that is going through their philosophy. But yeah, that care of the earth is what makes us human.
Well,
But that's also
I think we have a lot of common ground there, though, and maybe we can get to that a bit later. But yeah, on the name the trait topic. So, since you believe human beings should be granted these sorts of rights or moral value in your worldview versus animals, because they're a unique creation from God,
okay.
if we say if we hypothetically could find human beings that weren't a unique creation from God, you'd be fine with killing and eating those humans?
Those wouldn't be humans. I mean, what you're asking ultimately is the pygmy question. Ultimately, if we talk about like certain Bantu groups and pygmies, they would eat pygmies because they considered them not human because they were midgets. I do not
Yeah.
subscribe to that. I believe that both the Bantu and the pygmy are human. Unfortunately, people do apply can apply that heuristic and have. But no, I would say that every human is created in the image and likeness of God. On a recent show we had done, we talked about the existence of dog-faced people. This is something very common in the cryptid community, but that that was speculated and theorized in many of the ancient writings, and people even talk about the existence of such people now. But St. Augustine points out, if those people were capable of reasoning like humans, even if their language was strange, so on and so forth, they're humans. So yeah, humans can be very, very different creatures, but we're always going to be humans. But your
So
dog is never going to be a human. Your dog's your
yes.
dog.
So how do you identify a human? Like, what's your definition of a human being?
Well, a human being has the ability to tell right from wrong. They have the ability to learn, and they have the ability to communicate with their creator in ways that are pretty standard throughout human history. Um,
So
you
this
know,
has nothing to do with, say, genetics or reproduction.
why genetics is a fairly recent science, and we knew what humans were before genetics. But the point is that, I mean, that does confirm that there are, for example, repetitive structures. You can find repetitive structures at a cellular level, not just in humans and, say, monkeys, but in humans and fish. And you can find that in birds and fish and birds. And but the point is, the fact that we all have common organic building blocks, which is I see that completely, doesn't change the fact that humans have always understood what humans were in a fairly, with exception of certain small groups like I mentioned with the pygmies. Um, Humans have generally recognized other humans as human.
Right, but I'm just wondering, is your definition of human being, does that have anything to do with like biology, genetics, genomic structure, anything like that?
I
Or
would
is it
imagine all those things
entirely
contribute. I mean, you're asking me what defines a human, and I'm trying to define it
well,
in both a spiritual but also a
yeah,
biological sense. So yeah, I
maybe
wouldn't deny genomics, etc. But that's
sure. Okay, so let me ask like a maybe a clarifying question. So
sure.
like you've seen Star Trek, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so any alien species from Star Trek, so Klingons, what are the pointy-eared guys
the
again?
Vulcans.
Yeah, the Vulcans.
Hmm.
If say they were real, somehow like Star Trek was right, Vulcans were real. They're
Sure.
not human beings, correct? Like they're Vulcans in your
Uh,
view?
no, I wouldn't say that. I would say that they're a different kind of human being because of the fact that if we remember, Spock is half Vulcan and half human, which means that they were able to mate and reproduce. That would tell me that this is a very different kind of human, but clearly, if it produces a human, it's a human.
Okay.
And there's half Klingons too, so Klingons could also reproduce with humans, which would also make them human.
Okay. I think there are a few species in Star Trek that couldn't interbreed with humans, or at least wasn't confirmed anyway.
I haven't. Yeah, I'm not big on the whole Star Trek mythos. Sorry.
Sure, okay, but let's use Mass Effect as an example, like a video game. There are species in Mass Effect that can't interbreed.
I don't know
Um,
what that is, but okay, I'll go with it.
Sure. So let's say an alien species that was very much like a human being, same overall body structure, 5 fingers, eyes, had language, but couldn't interbreed with a human. You would be fine with turning them into hamburgers because they're not a unique creation from God?
Well, first off, you're asking me a theoretical question
Yeah.
about a theoretical creature and asking whether God would count that as a human. The problem is that we're not dealing with actual creatures. We're dealing with theoretical ones. Yeah, sure. I mean, one could make the argument, well, why can't they reproduce? That could be scientifically studied, so on and so forth. But in the end, we're not talking about real things. So, I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment, but in the end, if you're asking me what God would say for that, I wouldn't have an answer. One, because I'm not God, and two, because it's a thought experiment.
Yeah, so it is a thought experiment. It isn't real. I don't know if aliens do exist or not, but what is real are your beliefs. And if your beliefs tell you that if something is not a unique creation from God, it's okay to kill and eat it, then
I
if
wouldn't
we
go so
were
far.
to be in that situation, you'd be fine with killing and eating like a highly intelligent creature with culture. Um,
Can you give
because
me an
it's just not a
example?
unique creation from God. Well, I gave you the alien example. So like
No, I mean
like
a real one.
aliens visited Earth. It doesn't need to be a real one. I'm just testing your principles.
Right, but all of my principles are based on things that are identifiable.
Is God
In the first,
identifiable?
I believe so.
Okay, well, I've never seen God, never heard him, never spoken to him.
We can work on that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people haven't. And again, like if this were a real thing, like I don't know why this is still like if God was a very real presence, it's kind of strange that we're still having debates on whether or not he exists. So I could say that your God has your God may be like a fantasy or hypothetical, just like this alien example.
I would argue that the reason we still have debates on the existence of God is because of the persistent intractability of man and his lack of a desire to follow God's will.
Right, but my point is if you're going to say you're not going to answer a hypothetical question on the basis of it not being based in reality, like
Well,
I mean, I could deny any question you propose to me that has anything to do with God because I could say it's not based in reality. Like we're talking about moral principles, and I'm just trying to test your moral principles here.
well, and that's fair. I'm not, I'm not bothered by it, but I will switch back to reality when we're talking about things that have real consequences. And when we are talking about whether real animals, have rights, real rights, as compared to humans, real humans, I see no reason to go into the hypothetical to justify my position. The simple reality is, and we haven't even talked about it, since I don't believe in human rights, it obviously follows that I probably don't believe in animal rights because animals don't believe in rights because they can't even conceive rights. So the point is, we're ascribing rights to animals that aren't even aware that they exist. Can you tell me that your dogs understand that they have the rights that you claim?
Well, hang on before we pass through this avenue. Um, what Vegan Gains said is a hypothetical to test your logic is
Yes.
valid. It is a valid hypothetical to test your logic. There's no problem unless you can come up with why it's a contradiction or something like this. I don't see what grounds you would really have to dismiss answering to the hypothetical. It's a valid hypothetical.
Well, and let me just say this, like you mentioned, you only care about real world things that have consequences. Well, one real world consequence of this issue is people getting the idea that you have that it's okay to kill things that aren't that weren't uniquely made in the image of God, and that has caused mass killings of pygmies. So
Well,
like
first,
again,
yeah, that
there
wasn't
are real
Christian tribe.
consequences to your moral views, and it's resulted in quite a few human deaths, unfortunately.
Well,
So
if I may, in the first place, those were not Christian tribes, so it would not be ascribing my worldview. In the second place, to answer the question of your hypothetical, what I was saying was I don't know, and we would require further study in the case of your hypothetical 99% human that for some reason doesn't reproduce with humans but acts like a human in every other way. Um, but the point is, ultimately, the question has to be when we're talking about situations that are grounded in reality, as you pointed out, this had caused the deaths of, I don't know if it was thousands of pygmies. I have no idea how many pygmies died. I don't think you know either. Maybe you do. But the point is that ultimately, the reason that the reason that they did harm the pygmies was because they didn't believe they were human. It was dehumanization that caused that. And so my point is that dehumanization can also take a number of other different forms. And ultimately, I think that to some degree, veganism dehumanizes as well. So yeah, and
all
I
right.
don't, yeah, but
Yeah,
go ahead.
well, I have two things to say to that. If people were following my worldview, they would have never killed pygmies. Whereas it is conceivable if people were following your worldview, they may have killed pygmies if they were
Understood.
convinced pygmies were not human and made in the unique image of God.
Your worldview is
Secondly,
70 years old.
okay, well, anyway, regardless, it is conceivable that those pygmies would have been killed if they were following your worldview, where it would be inconceivable if they believed in my worldview that they'd killed pygmies.
I disagree completely. I think that the church would be very clear that pygmies are human, and I don't think that I would accept your position. I think that you're you're basically making an aspersion over my faith, but you don't actually understand it, and that's fine. But I'm not going to just sit here and say, well, that's actually what would happen. You're wrong.
Okay, and secondly, you gave the answer. You don't know. You'd have to study. So
That is a hypothetical alien.
I outlined all the circumstances in the hypothetical. Like, what don't you know? Like, what information are you missing in the hypothetical where you'd give an answer like, I don't know?
Why they don't reproduce the same way? That was my question. If it's
okay,
humanoid, I would wonder why it doesn't work.
Yeah, sure. So in the case of an alien civilization coming to Earth and they're not able to reproduce with humans, the reason they're not able to reproduce is because of incompatible genetics. Like the same reason a cat and dog can't reproduce, or the same reason a human can't breed with an ostrich. So in that case, if we were to find a very intelligent, cultured race like Vulcans, or it could be any alien species that couldn't reproduce with humans for that reason, would you be okay with killing and eating them?
I think, frankly, if we were dealing with a hyper-intelligent alien race that could not reproduce with us, but could still travel through space and arrive, I think I'd be more concerned with whether they're going to eat us than whether we're going to eat them.
Okay, sure, but as far as the question, if you'd be okay with killing and eating them,
I wouldn't even know how to respond to that. I mean, frankly, I don't like the idea of eating, say, for example, monkey, because it does bear some kind of resemblance to a human, but it is a popular dish in many countries. I personally, it doesn't strike me as something I would want to do. But I'm leaving that, again, that's subjective. It's personal. It's my opinion. Would I have any moral grounds to say that such aliens, if somehow they weren't trying to eat us, that we couldn't eat them? I wouldn't. I would say that there'd probably be no reason we couldn't eat them. For the same reason, there's no reason we can't eat animals that try to kill us that are larger now.
Okay, and let's suppose the aliens weren't trying to kill and eat us and they're peaceful like us, or maybe even more peaceful than us, more benevolent. Would you be okay with killing and eating them on the basis of them not being a unique creation from God?
In all honesty, with the theory that you've put up, I would have to seriously revise my question of theology. I'd have to revise my question of anthropology. I don't know. And so because that doesn't exist, I don't know. I mean, we could create theoretical scenarios that are so far-fetched, because right now we've created an alien race that is humanoid, that is capable of traveling to Earth, that is completely benevolent. I don't believe in aliens. I personally think that most of the alien deception stuff is demonic. I have to jump through a lot of hoops to kind of satisfy the question of whether there is a being that is not human that I would not be willing to eat.
Yeah. So in order for me, I'm going to try to move because I understand where this is going. So I understand the principle of the hypothetical. It's actually a very common vegan critique. So just kind of for the purposes of this, I just want to try to maybe give a little clarification. Vegan Gains, you can tell me if I'm wrong here. What he's asking is that if you had a duplication of a human being, absent whatever the trait is that you consider to be the image of God, so let's say like a perfect clone or something like this, would you then be okay if it had all of the same physiological traits as a human being, but was absent whatever the other X thing was? What would you consider, or why is it that you wouldn't eat that being?
Well, I would, in all honesty, if we're talking about that level of similitude, I'd probably consider the alien a human being.
Okay, so if you're talking about an alien species that's extremely similar to human but just couldn't interbreed for the same reason a cat and dog can't interbreed, you'd actually consider them human?
I can probably, if they seemed human, if they reacted like human, then
okay.
Yeah, I mean, but effectively there are humans who can't interbreed too.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, there are people with genetic disorders.
I'm not going to want to eat them.
Okay. So that that kind of clarifies something for me, so that your view on what a human isn't necessarily, about genetics. One thing that humans and animals do share is this connection to God. So I just see this as a bit contradictory, that humans can lack all these traits that you would value humans for, but like the only thing that humans like in this circumstance might have is a connection to God. But you also say that animals have a connection to God.
Mhm.
So there's no difference between, like, I don't see any meaningful difference between a comparable human and a comparable animal, but you'd be okay with killing and eating the animal, but not killing and eating the human. That seems like a contradiction to me.
Why would I want to kill a human?
I know. There's not really any reason, but my point is, I don't see any reason for why you'd want to kill and eat an animal.
Because I'm hungry.
Yeah, okay, so that would be contradictory. Again, if we trait equalize, well, we've already trait equalized the human and the animal to where, okay, the human completely lacks culture, intelligence, only has a connection to God.
Mhm.
The animal lacks intelligence, culture, but has a connection to God.
Mhm.
The only difference here is genetics, but we've already kind of solved the problem. We've already sort of sorted out that problem that you don't really care about genetics. So if they're trait equalized, but you treat them completely differently, that seems like a contradiction to me.
Okay, well, I think that's fair. Now, one thing that we did point out is that this hypothetical human is born of another human being. This means that they are part of the human community.
Yeah, so the vegan society definition, I don't agree with. I think their definition is reducing the suffering, death, exploitation of animals as much as reasonably possible. That's their definition.
Mhm.
I don't
Bivalves are
agree.
animals, though.
Yeah, I don't agree with that definition. And if we're going to have the most charitable interpretation of that definition, I think it's assumed that they're talking about sentient animals, not non-sentient animals. But I don't follow their definition. The definition I follow is one that I created, which is veganism is a logical extension of human rights.